Hello and welcome back, Space Raiders. My name is Eve. That is Y-V-E-S. Eve. The S is silent. If you are joining me for the first time, I'm very happy to have you here. If you're returning, welcome back. If you're watching live, welcome to my Twitch. If you're watching a past broadcast on YouTube, welcome to my channel. And as my good friend Eldon would say, hello, VOD people. Today we're going to be reading from the sequel to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, titled The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. We're going to begin where we left off last week at chapter 18. We had just gotten to Milliways, which is the restaurant at the end of the universe, and we were amidst the vast and beautiful and terrifying explosion that is the end of life as we know it. And there was a few other things going on, some shenanigans. Ford Prefect is quite drunk on Pan-Galactic Gargle Blasters. Zaphod's getting there. Arthur is completely lost, and I believe we've just heard from Marvin the Robot. So we're going to pick back up right there. Then get comfy. The main reception foyer was almost empty, but Ford nevertheless weaved his way through it. Zaphod grasped him firmly by the arm and maneuvered him into a cubicle standing to one side of the entrance hall. "What are you doing to him?" asked Arthur. "Sobering him up," said Zaphod, and pushed a coin into a slot. Lights flashed, gases swirled. "Hi," Ford said, stepping out a moment later. "Where are we going?" "Down to the parking lot, come on." "What about the personnel time teleports?" said Ford. "Get us straight back to the Heart of Gold." "Yeah, but I've cooled on that ship. Zarnwoop can have it. I don't want to play his games. Let's see what we can find." A Sirius Cybernetics Corporation Happy Vertical People transporter took them down deep into the substrata beneath the restaurant. They were glad to see it had been vandalized and didn't try to make them happy as well as take them down. At the bottom of the shaft, the elevator doors opened, and a blast of cold, stale air hit them. The first thing they saw on leaving the elevator was a long concrete wall with over 50 doors in it, offering lavatory facilities for all of 50 major life forms. Nevertheless, like every parking lot in the galaxy throughout the entire history of parking lots, this parking lot smelled predominantly of impatience. They turned a corner and found themselves on a moving catwalk that traversed a vast, cavernous space that stretched off into the dim distance. It was divided off into bays, each of which contained a spaceship belonging to one of the diners upstairs, some smallish and utilitarian mass production models, others vast, shining limo ships, the playthings of the very rich. Zaphod's eyes sparkled with something that may or may not have been avarice as he pulled over them. In fact, it's best to be clear on this point. Avarice is definitely what it was. "There he is," said Trillian. "Marvin, down there." They looked where she was pointing. Dimly, they could see a small metal figure listlessly rubbing a small rag on one remote corner of a giant silver sun cruiser. At short intervals along the moving catwalk, wide, transparent tubes led down to floor level. Zaphod stepped off the catwalk into one of these and floated gently downward. The others followed. Thinking back to this later, Arthur Dent thought it was the single most enjoyable experience of his travels in the galaxy. "Hi, Marky G. How are you today?" "Welcome back, my dear." "Hey, Marvin," said Zaphod, striding over toward him. "Hey, kid, are we pleased to see you?" Marvin turned, and insofar as it is possible for a totally inert metal face to look reproachful, this is what it did. "No, you're not," he said. "No one ever is." "Suit yourself," said Zaphod, and turned away to ogle the ships. Ford went with him. Only Trillian and Arthur actually went up to Marvin. "No, we really are," said Trillian, and patted him in a way that he disliked intensely. "Hanging around waiting for us all this time?" 576,000,000,003,579 years, said Marvin. "I counted them." "Well, here we are now," said Trillian, feeling, quite correctly in Marvin's view, that it was a slightly foolish thing to say. "The first 10 million years were the worst," said Marvin. "And the second 10 million years, they were the worst too. The third 10 million I didn't enjoy at all. After that I went into a bit of a decline." He paused just long enough to make them feel they ought to say something, and then interrupted. "It's the people you meet in this job that really get you down," he said, then paused again. Trillian cleared her throat. Is that? The best conversation I had was over 40 million years ago," continued Marvin. Again the pause. "Oh, and that was with a coffee machine." He waited. You don't like talking to me, do you?" said Marvin in a low, desolate tone. Trillian talked to Arthur instead. Farther down the chamber, Ford Prefect had found something of which he very much liked the look. Several such things, in fact. "Zaphod," he said, in a quiet voice, "just look at some of these little star trolleys." Zaphod looked, and liked. The craft they were looking at was, in fact, pretty small, but extraordinary, and very much a rich kid's toy. It was not much to look at. It resembled nothing so much as a paper dart about 20 feet long, made of thin but tough metal foil. At the rear end was a small, horizontal two-man cockpit. It had a tiny charm drive engine, which was not capable of moving it at any great speed. The thing it did have, however, was a heat sink. The heat sink had a mass of some 2,000 billion tons and was contained within a black hole mounted in an electromagnetic field situated halfway along the length of the ship. And this heat sink enabled the craft to be maneuvered to within a few miles of a yellow sun, there to catch and ride the solar flares that burst out from its surface. Flare riding is one of the most exotic and exhilarating sports in existence, and those who can dare and afford to do it are among the most lionized men in the galaxy. It is also, of course, stupefyingly dangerous. Those who don't die riding invariably die of sexual exhaustion at one of the Daedalus Club's après flare parties. Ford and Zaphod looked and passed on. "And this baby," said Ford, "the tangerine star buggy with the black sunbusters." Again, the star buggy was a small ship, a totally misnamed one, in fact, because the one thing it couldn't manage was interstellar distances. Basically, it was a sporty planet hopper dolled up to look like something it wasn't. Nice lines, though. They passed on. The next one was a big one and 30 yards long. A coach limo ship, and obviously designed with one aim in mind, that of making the beholder sick with envy. The paintwork and accessory detail clearly said, "Not only am I rich enough to afford this ship, I'm also rich enough not to take it seriously." It was wonderfully hideous. "Hi, Lust and Pain, how are you? Welcome to the stream." "Just look at it," said Zaphod. "Multi-cluster quark drive, Persuplex, running boards, gotta be a Laslar Lyricon custom job." He examined every inch. "Yes," he said. "Look, the infrapink lizard emblem on the neutrino cowling. Laslar's trademark. The man has no shame." "I was passed by one of these mothers once out of the Axel Nebula," said Ford. "I was going flat out, and this thing just strolled past me, star drive hardly ticking over. Just incredible." Zaphod whistled appreciatively. 10 seconds later," said Ford, "it smashed straight into the third moon of Jaglin Beta." "Yeah, right." "Amazing looking ship, though. Looks like a fish, moves like a fish, steers like a cow." Ford looked round the other side. "Hey, come see," he called out. "There's a big mural painted on the side. A bursting sun, disaster area's trademark. This must be Hot Black's ship. Lucky old bugger. They do this terrible song, you know, which ends with a stunt ship crashing into the sun. Meant to be an amazing spectacle. Expensive in stunt ships, though." Zaphod's attention, however, was elsewhere. His attention was riveted on the ship standing next to Hot Black Desiato's limo. His mouths hung open. "That," he said, "that is really bad for the eyes." Ford looked. He, too, stood astonished. It was a ship of classic, simple design, like a flattened salmon, 20 yards long, very clean, very sleek. There was just one remarkable thing about it. "It's so black," said Ford Prefect. "You can hardly make out its shape. Light just seems to fall into it." Zaphod said nothing. He had simply fallen in love. The blackness of it was so extreme that it was almost impossible to tell how close you were standing to it. "Your eyes just slide off it," said Ford in wonder. It was an emotional moment. He bit his lip. Zaphod moved forward to it, slowly, like a man possessed, or, more accurately, like a man who wanted to possess. His hand reached out to stroke it. His hand stopped. His hand reached out to stroke it again. His hand stopped again. "Come and feel this surface," he said in a hushed voice. Ford put his hand out to feel it. His hand stopped. You can't," he said. "See," said Zaphod. "It's just totally frictionless. This must be one mother of a mover." He turned to look at Ford seriously. At least one of his heads did. The other stayed gazing in awe at the ship. "What you reckon, Ford?" he said. "You mean, Ford looked over his shoulder. "You mean stroll off with it? You think we should?" "No, nor do I. But we're going to, aren't we?" "How can we not?" They gazed a little longer, till Zaphod suddenly pulled himself together. "We better shift soon," he said. "In a moment or so the universe will have ended, and all the Captain Creeps will be pouring down here to find their bourgeois mobiles." "Zaphod," said Ford. "Yeah? How do we do it?" "Simple," said Zaphod. He turned. "Marvin!" he called. Slowly, laboriously, and with a million little clinking and creaking noises that he had learned to simulate, Marvin turned round to answer the summons. "Come on over here," said Zaphod. "We got a job for you." Marvin trudged toward them. "I won't enjoy it," he said. "Yes, you will," enthused Zaphod. "It's a whole new life stretching out ahead of you." "Oh, not another one," groaned Marvin. "Will you shut up and listen?" hissed Zaphod. "This time there's going to be excitement, adventure, and really wild things." "Sounds awful," Marvin said. "Marvin, all I'm trying to ask you, I suppose you want me to open this spaceship for you." "What? Yes, yeah, that's right," said Zaphod jumpily. He was keeping at least 3 eyes on the entrance. Time was short. "Well, I wish you'd just tell me that rather than try to engage my enthusiasm," said Marvin, "because I haven't got one." He walked on up to the ship, touched it, and a hatchway swung open. Ford and Zaphod stared at the opening. "Don't mention it," said Marvin. "Oh, you didn't." He trudged away again. Arthur and Trillian clustered around. "What's happening?" asked Arthur. "Look at this," said Ford. "Look at the interior of this ship." "Weirder and weirder," breathed Zaphod. "It's black," said Ford. "Everything in it is just totally black." In the restaurant, things were fast approaching the moment after which there wouldn't be any more moments. All eyes were fixed on the dome, other than those of Hot Black Desiato's bodyguard, which were looking intently at Hot Black Desiato, and those of Hot Black Desiato himself, which the bodyguard had closed out of respect. The bodyguard leaned forward over the table. Had Hot Black Desiato been alive, he probably would have deemed this a good moment to lean back, or even go for a short walk. His bodyguard was not a man who improved with proximity. On account of his unfortunate condition, however, Hot Black Desiato remained totally inert. Mr. Desiato, sir, whispered the bodyguard. Whenever he spoke, it looked as if the muscles on either side of his mouth were clambering over each other to get out of the way. Mr. Desiato, can you hear me? Hot Black Desiato quite naturally said nothing. Hot Black, hissed the bodyguard. Again, quite naturally, Hot Black Desiato did not reply. Supernaturally, however, he did. On the table in front of him, a wine glass rattled, and a fork rose an inch or so and tapped against the glass. It settled on the table again. The bodyguard gave a satisfied grunt. It's time we're going, Mr. Desiato, muttered the bodyguard. Don't want to get caught in the rush, not in your condition. You want to get to the next gig nice and relaxed. There's a really big audience for it. One of the best. Kakra food. 576,000 2 million years ago. You been looking forward to it? The fork rose again, paused, wiggled in a non-committal sort of way, and dropped again. Come on, said the bodyguard. It's going to have been great. You knocked him cold. The bodyguard would have given Mr. Dan Street Mentioner an apoplectic attack. I don't know if I've ever read the word apoplectic before, sorry. The black ship going into the sun always gets him, and the new one's a beauty. Be real sorry to see it go. If we get on down there, I'll set the black ship autopilot and we'll cruise off in the limo, okay? The fork tapped once in agreement, and the glass of wine mysteriously emptied itself. The bodyguard wheeled Hot Black Desiato's chair out of the restaurant. And now, cried Max from the center of the stage, the moment you've all been waiting for. He flung his arms into the air. Behind him, the band went into a frenzy of percussion and rolling synth-chords. Max had argued with them about this, but they had claimed it was in their contract that that's what they would do. His agent would have to sort it out. The skies begin to boil, he cried. Nature collapses into the screaming void. In 20 seconds' time, the universe itself will be at an end. See where the light of infinity bursts in upon us. The hideous fury of destruction blazed about them, and at that moment a still, small trumpet sounded as from an infinite distance. Max's eyes swiveled round to glare at the band. None of them seemed to be playing a trumpet. Suddenly, a wisp of smoke was swirling and shimmering on the stage next to him. The trumpet was joined by more trumpets. Over 500 times Max had done this show, and nothing like this had ever happened before. He drew back in alarm from the swirling smoke, and as he did so, a figure slowly materialized inside, the figure of an ancient man, bearded, robed, and wreathed in light. In his eyes were stars, and on his brow, a golden crown. What's this? Whispered Max, wild-eyed. What's happening? At the back of the restaurant, the stony-faced party from the Church of the Second Coming of the Great Prophet Zarquan leapt ecstatically to their feet, chanting and crying. Max blinked in amazement. He threw his arms up to the audience. A big hand, please, ladies and gentlemen, he hollered. For the great prophet Zarquan! He has come! Zarquan has come again! Thunderous applause broke out as Max strode across the stage and handed his microphone to the prophet. Zarquan coughed. He peered around at the assembled gathering. The stars in his eyes twinkled uneasily. He handled the microphone with confusion. He said. Hello. Look, I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I've had the most ghastly time, all sorts of things cropping up at the last moment. He seemed nervous of the expectant, awed hush. He cleared his throat. How are we for time? He said. Have I got just a... And so the universe ended. I don't know how much I'm going to get through today. My throat's a little more raw than I thought it was. Chapter 19. One of the major selling points of that wholly remarkable travel book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, apart from its relative cheapness and the fact that it has the words "Don't Panic" written in large friendly letters on its cover, is its compendious and occasionally accurate glossary. The statistics relating to the geosocial nature of the universe, for instance, are deftly set out between pages 938,324 and 938,326, and the simplistic style in which they are written is partly explained by the fact that the editors, having to meet a publishing deadline, copied the information off the back of a packet of breakfast cereal, hastily embroidering it with a few footnotes in order to avoid prosecution under the incomprehensibly tortuous galactic copyright laws. It is interesting to note that a later and wilier editor sent the book backward in time through a temporal warp, and then successfully sued the breakfast cereal company for infringement of the same laws. Here is a sample. The universe. Some information to help you live in it. 1. Area. Infinite. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy offers this definition of the word infinite. Infinite, bigger than the biggest thing ever, and then some, much bigger than that, in fact. Really amazingly immense, a totally stunning size, real, wow that's big time. Infinity is just so big that, by comparison, bigness itself looks really titchy. Gigantic multiplied by colossal, multiplied by staggeringly huge is the sort of concept we're trying to get across here. 2. Imports. None. It is impossible to import things into an infinite area, there being no outside to import things in from. 3. Exports. None. See imports. 4. Population. None. It is known that there are an infinite number of worlds simply because there is an infinite amount of space for them to be in. However, not every one of them is inhabited, therefore there must be a finite number of inhabited worlds. Any finite number divided by infinity is as near to nothing as makes no odds, so the average population of all the planets in the universe can be said to be 0. From this it follows that the population of the whole universe is also 0, and that any people you may meet from time to time are merely the products of a deranged imagination. 5. Monetary units. Also none. In fact, there are 3 freely convertible currencies in the galaxy, but none of them count. The Eltarian dollar has recently collapsed, the Flanian pobble bead is only exchangeable for other Flanian pobble beads, and the Triganic pubis... Not pubis. The Triganic pew has its very own special problems. An exchange rate of 8 ningas to 1 pew is simple enough, but a ningi is triangular rubber coin 6,800 miles long on each side. No one has ever collected enough to own one. Pew, ningi are not negotiable currency because the Galactabanks refuse to deal in fiddling small change. From this basic premise, it is very simple to prove that the Galactabanks are also the product of a deranged imagination. 6. Art. None. The function of art is to hold up the mirror to nature, and there simply isn't a mirror big enough. See point 1. 7. Sex. None. Well, in fact, there is an awful lot of this, largely because of the total lack of money, trade, banks, art, or anything else that might keep all the non-existent people of the universe occupied. However, it is not worth embarking on a long discussion of it now because it really is terribly complicated. For further information, see Guide, Chapter 7, 9, 10, 11, 14, 16, 17, 19, 21 to 84 inclusive, and in fact, of the most of the rest of the guide. Chapter 20. The restaurant continued existing, but everything else had stopped. Temporal realistatics held it and protected it in a nothingness that wasn't merely a vacuum. It was simply nothing. There was nothing in which a vacuum could be said to exist. The force-shielded dome had once again been rendered opaque. The party was over, the diners were leaving, Zarquan had vanished, along with the rest of the universe. The time turbines were preparing to pull the restaurant back across the brink of time in readiness for the lunch sitting, and Max Quartoplane was back in his small curtained dressing room, trying to raise his agent on the tempophone. In the parking lot stood the black ship, closed and silent. Into the parking lot came the late Mr. Hot Black Desiato, propelled along the moving catwalk by his bodyguard. They descended one of the tubes. As they approached the limo ship, a hatchway swung down from its side, engaged the wheels of the wheelchair, and drew it inside. The bodyguard followed, and having seen his boss safely connected up to his death support system, moved up to the small cockpit. Here he operated the remote control system which activated the autopilot in the black ship lying next to the limo, thus causing great relief to Zaphod Beeblebrox, who had been trying to start the thing for over 10 minutes. The black ship glided smoothly forward out of its bay, turned and moved down the central causeway swiftly and quietly. At the end, it accelerated rapidly, flung itself into the temporal launch chamber, and began the long journey back into the distant past. Hello, OSX freak, and welcome. Yes, it is a lot of references, and it was a mouthful to get out. The Milloway's lunch menu quotes, by permission, a passage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The passage is this. The history of every major galactic civilization tends to pass through three distinct and recognizable phases, those of survival, inquiry, and sophistication, otherwise known as the how, why, and where phases. For instance, the first phase is characterized by the question, how can we eat? The second by the question, why do we eat? The third by the question, where shall we have lunch? The menu goes on to suggest that Milloway's, the restaurant at the end of the universe, would be a very agreeable and sophisticated answer to that third question. What it doesn't go on to say is that, though it will usually take a large civilization many thousands of years to pass through the how, why, and where phases, small social groupings under stressful conditions can pass through them with extreme rapidity. "How are we doing?" said Arthur Dent. "Badly," said Ford Prefect. "Where are we going?" said Trillian. "I don't know," said Zaphod Beeblebrox. "Why not?" demanded Arthur Dent. "Shut up," suggested Zaphod Beeblebrox and Ford Prefect. "Basically, what you're trying to say," said Arthur Dent, ignoring this suggestion, "is that we're out of control." The ship was rocking and swaying sickeningly as Ford and Zaphod tried to wrest control from the autopilot. The engines howled and whined like tired children in a supermarket. "It's the wild color scheme that freaks me," said Zaphod, whose love affair with this ship had lasted almost 3 minutes into the flight. "Every time you try to operate one of these weird black controls that are labeled in black on a black background, a little black light pops up black to let you know you've done it. What is this, some kind of galactic hyperhearse?" The walls of the swaying cabin were also black. The ceiling was black. The seats, which were rudimentary since the only important trip this ship was designed for was supposed to be unmanned, were black. The control panel was black. The instruments were black. The little screws that held them in place were black. The thin, tufted nylon floor covering was black, and they had lifted up a corner of it and had discovered that the foam underlay was also black. "Perhaps whoever designed it had eyes that responded to different wavelengths," offered Trillian. "Or didn't have much of an imagination," muttered Arthur. "Perhaps," said Marvin. He was feeling very depressed. In fact, though they weren't to know it, the decor had been chosen in honor of its owner's sad, lamented, and tax-deductible condition. The ship gave a particularly sickening lurch. "Take it easy," pleaded Arthur. "You're making me space sick." "Time sick," said Ford. "We're plummeting backward through time." "Thank you," said Arthur. "Now I think I really am going to be ill." "Go ahead," said Zaphod. "We could do with a little color about the place." "This is meant to be polite after-dinner conversation, is it?" snapped Arthur. Zaphod left the controls to Ford to figure out and lurched over to Arthur. "Look, Earthman," he said angrily, "you got a job to do, right? Question to the ultimate answer, right?" "What, that thing?" said Arthur. "I thought we'd forgotten about that." "Not me, baby. Like the mice said, it's worth a lot of money in the right quarters, and it's all locked up in that head thing of yours." "Yes, but nothing. Think about it. The meaning of life. We get our fingers on that, we can hold every shrink in the galaxy up to ransom, and that's worth a bundle. I owe mine a mint." Arthur took a deep breath without much enthusiasm. "All right," he said, "but where do we start? How should I know? They say the ultimate answer, or whatever, is 42. How am I supposed to know what the question is? Could be anything. I mean, what's 6 times 7? Zaphod looked at him hard for a moment. Then his eyes blazed with excitement. 42! He cried. Arthur wiped his palm across his forehead. Yes, he said patiently. I know that. Zaphod's faces fell. I'm just saying the question could be anything at all, said Arthur, and I don't see how I'm meant to know. Because, hissed Zaphod, you're there when your planet did the big firework. We have a thing on Earth, began Arthur. Had, corrected Zaphod. Called tact. Never mind. Look, I just don't know. A low voice echoed dully around the cabin. I know, said Marvin. Ford called out from the controls he was still fighting a losing battle with. Stay out of this, Marvin, he said. This is organism talk. It's printed in the Earthman's brainwave patterns, continued Marvin, but I don't suppose you'll be very interested in knowing that. You mean, said Arthur, you mean you can see into my mind? Yes, said Marvin. Arthur stared in astonishment. And, he said, it amazes me how you can manage to live in anything that small. Ah, said Arthur, abuse. Yes, confirmed Marvin. I ignore him, said Zaphod. He's only making it up. Making it up, said Marvin, swiveling his head in a parody of astonishment. Why should I want to make anything up? Life's bad enough as it is without wanting to invent any more of it. Marvin, said Trillian in the gentle, kindly voice that only she was still capable of assuming in talking to this misbegotten creature. If you knew all along, why then didn't you tell us? Marvin's head swiveled back to her. You didn't ask, he said simply. Well, we're asking you now, Metal Man, said Ford, turning round to look at him. At that moment, the ship suddenly stopped rocking and swaying. The engine pitch settled down to a gentle hum. Sorry, my nose is really itchy. Sometimes this happens when I'm reading it. I don't know why. Hey, Ford, said Zaphod. That sounds good. You ever worked out the controls on this boat? No, said Ford. I just stopped fiddling with them. I reckon we just go to wherever this ship is going and get off it fast. Yeah, right, said Zaphod. I could tell you weren't really interested, murmured Marvin to himself and slumped into a corner and switched himself off. Trouble is, said Ford, that the one instrument in this whole ship that is giving any reading is worrying me. If it is what I think it is, and if it's saying what I think it's saying, then we've already gone too far back into the past. Maybe as much as 2 million years before our own time. Zaphod shrugged. Time's bunk, he said. I wonder who this ship belongs to anyway, said Arthur. Me, said Zaphod. No, who it really belongs to. Really me, insisted Zaphod. Look, property's theft, right? Therefore theft's property, therefore this ship's mine, okay? Tell the ship that, said Arthur. Zaphod strode over to the console. Ship, he said, banging on the panels. This is your new owner speaking to you. He got no further. Several things happened at once. The ship dropped out of time travel mode and re-emerged into real space. All the controls on the console, which had been shut down for the time trip, now lit up. A large vision screen above the console winked into life, revealing a wide starscape and a single very large sun dead ahead of them. None of these things, however, were responsible for the fact that Zaphod was, at the moment, hurled bodily backward against the rear of the cabin, as were all the others. They were hurled back by a single, thunderous clap of noise that thudded out of the monitor speakers surrounding the vision screen. Oh, I'm glad my nose scratching is not bothering you. Feels tacky. Like to just be like doing a bunch of this. I'm like, I swear I'm fine, guys. You know? Alright, I think I got one more chapter in me. Chapter 21. Down on the dry, red world of Kakrafoon, in the middle of the vast red-lit desert, the stage technicians were testing the sound system. That is to say, the sound system was in the desert, not the technicians. They had retreated to the safety of Disaster Area's giant control ship, which hung in orbit some 400 miles above the surface of the planet, and they were testing the sound from there. Anyone within 500 miles of the speaker silos wouldn't have survived the tuning up. If Arthur Dent had been within 5 miles of the speaker silos, then his expiring thought would have been that in both size and shape the round rig closely resembled Manhattan. Risen out of the silos, the neutron-phase speakers stacks towered monstrously against the sky, obscuring the banks of plutonium reactors and seismic amps behind them. Buried deep in concrete bunkers beneath the city of speakers lay the instruments that the musicians would control from their ship. The massive photon agatar, the bass detonator, and the mega bang drum complex. It was going to be a noisy show. Aboard the giant control ship, all was activity and bustle. Hot Black Desiato's limo ship, a mere tadpole beside it, had arrived and docked, and the lamented gentleman was being transported down in the high vaulted corridors to meet the medium, who was going to interpret his psychic impulses into the Agatar keyboard. A doctor, a logician, and a marine biologist had also just arrived, flown in at phenomenal expense from Maximegalon to try to reason with the lead singer, who had locked himself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills and was refusing to come out till it could be proved conclusively to him that he was not a fish. The bass player was busy and machine gunning his bedroom, and the drummer was nowhere on board. Frantic inquiries led to the discovery that he was standing on a beach on Santraginus, I always say this wrong, Santraginus 5, over 100 light years away, where, he claimed, he had been happy for over half an hour now and found a small stone that would be his friend. The band's manager was profoundly relieved. It meant that, for the 17th time on his tour, the drums would be played by a robot, and that therefore the timing of the symbolistics would be right. The subether was buzzing with the communications of the stage technicians testing the speaker channels, and it was this that was being relayed to the interior of the black ship. Its dazed occupants lay against the back wall of the cabin and listened to the voices on the monitor speakers. "Okay, channel 9 on power," said a voice. "Testing channel 15. Another thumping crack of noise walloped through the ship. "Channel 15 A-OK," said another voice. A third voice cut in. "Black stunt ship's now in position," it said. "It's looking good, gonna be a great sun dive. Stage computer online?" A computer voice answered. "Online," it said. "Take control of the black ship?" "Black ship locked into trajectory program, on standby." "Testing channel 20. Zaphod leapt across the cabin and switched frequencies on the subether receiver before the next mind-pulverizing noise hit him. He stood there, quivering. "What," said Trillian in a small, quiet voice, "does sundive mean?" "It means," said Marvin, "that the ship is going to dive into the sun. Sun dive. It's very simple to understand. What do you expect if you steal Hot Black Desiato's stunt ship?" "How do you know," said Zaphod in a voice that would make a vegan snow lizard feel chilly, "that this is Hot Black Desiato's stunt ship?" "Simple," said Marvin. "I parked it for him." "Then why didn't you tell us?" "You said you wanted excitement and adventure and really wild things." "This is awful," said Arthur, unnecessarily, in the pause which followed. "That's what I said," confirmed Marvin. On a different frequency, the subether receiver had picked up a public broadcast, which now echoed around the cabin. "Fine weather for the concert here this afternoon. I'm standing here in front of the stage," the reporter lied. "In the middle of the red-lit desert, and with the aid of the hyper-binoptic glasses, I can just about make out the huge audience cowering there on the horizon all around me. Behind me, the speaker stacks rise like a sheer cliff face, and high above me, the sun is shining away and doesn't know what's going to hit it. The environmentalist lobby do know what's going to hit it, and they claim that the concert will cause earthquakes, tidal waves, hurricanes, irreparable damage to the atmosphere, and all the usual things that environmentalists usually go on about. But I've just had a report that a representative of disaster area met with the environmentalists at lunchtime and had them all shot, so nothing now lies in the way of..." Zaphod switched it off. He turned to Ford. "Thinking what I'm thinking?" he said. "I think so," said Ford. "Tell me what you think I'm thinking." "I think you're thinking it's time we get off this ship." "I think you're right," said Zaphod. "I think you're right," said Ford. "How?" said Arthur. "Quiet," said Ford and Zaphod. "We're thinking." "So this is it," said Arthur. "We're going to die." "I wish you'd stop saying that," said Ford. "Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you like my reporter voice." I always thought I'd be like a good sportscaster or something like that. It is worth repeating at this point the theories that Ford had come up with on his first encounter with human beings to account for their peculiar habit of continually stating and restating the very, very obvious, as in, "It's a nice day," or "You're very tall, so this is it, we're going to die." His first theory was that if human beings didn't keep exercising their lips, their mouths probably shriveled up. After a few months of observation, he had come up with a second theory, which was this. If human beings don't keep exercising their lips, their brains start working. In fact, this second theory is more literally true of Belcerebon people of Kakrafoon. The Belcerebon people used to cause great resentment and insecurity among neighboring races by being one of the most enlightened, accomplished, and, above all, quiet civilizations of the galaxy. As a punishment for this behavior, which was held to be offensively self-righteous and provocative, a galactic tribunal inflicted on them the most cruel of all social diseases, telepathy. Consequently, in order to prevent themselves broadcasting every slightest thought that crosses their minds to anyone within a 5-mile radius, they now have to talk very loudly and continuously about the weather, their little aches and pains, the match this afternoon, and what a noisy place Kakrafoon has suddenly become. Another method of temporarily blotting out their minds is to play host to a disaster area concert. The timing of the concert was critical. Hey, duo, welcome back. How are you? The ship had to begin its dive before the concert began in order to hit the sun 6 minutes and 37 seconds before climax of the song to which it related, so that the light of the solar flares had time to travel out to Kakrafoon. The ship had already been diving for several minutes by the time that Ford Prefect had completed his search of the other compartments of the black ship. He burst back into the cabin. The sun of Kakrafoon loomed terrifyingly large on the vision screen, its blazing white inferno of fusing hydrogen nuclei growing moment by moment as the ship plunged onward, unheeding the thumping and banging of Zaphod's hands on the control panel. Arthur and Trillian had the fixed expressions of rabbits on a night road who think that the best way of dealing with approaching headlights is to stare them out. Zaphod spun around, wild-eyed. "Ford," he said, "how many escape capsules are there?" "None," said Ford. Zaphod gibbered. "Did you count 'em?" he yelled. "Twice," said Ford. "Did you manage to raise the stage crew on the radio?" "Yeah," said Zaphod bitterly. "I said there were a whole bunch of people on board. They said to say hi to everybody." Ford goggled. "Didn't you tell them who you were?" "Oh, yeah, they said it was a great honor, that and something about a restaurant being my executors." Ford pushed Arthur aside roughly and leaned over the control console. "Does none of this function?" he said savagely. "All overridden. Smash the autopilot." "Find it first, nothing connects." There was a moment's cold silence. Arthur was stumbling around the back of the cabin. He stopped suddenly. "Incidentally," he said, "what does teleport mean?" Another moment passed. Slowly, the others turned to face him. "Probably the wrong moment to ask," said Arthur. "It's just, I remember hearing you use the word a short while ago, and I only bring it up because..." "Where," said Ford Prefect quietly, "does it say teleport?" "Well, just over here, in fact," said Arthur, pointing at a dark control box in the rear of the cabin. "Just under the word emergency, above the word system, and beside the sign saying out of order." In the pandemonium that instantly followed, the only action to follow was that of Ford Prefect lunging across the cabin to the small black box that Arthur had indicated, and stabbing repeatedly at the single small black button set into it. A 6-foot square panel slid open beside it, revealing a compartment which resembled a multiple shower unit that had found a new function in life as an electrician's junk store. Half-finished wiring hung from the ceiling, a jumble of abandoned components lay strewn on the floor, and the programming panel lolled out of the cavity in the wall into which it should have been secured. A junior disaster area accountant visiting the shipyard where the ship was being constructed had demanded to know the works of the works foreman why the hell they were fitting an extremely expensive teleport into a ship which only had one important journey to make, and that unmanned. The foreman had explained that the teleport was available at a 10% discount, and the accountant had explained that this was immaterial. The foreman had explained that it was the finest, most powerful, and sophisticated teleport that money could buy, and the accountant had explained that the money did not wish to buy it. The foreman had explained that people would still need to enter and leave the ship, and the accountant had explained that the ship sported a perfectly serviceable door. The foreman had explained that the accountant could go and boil his head, and the accountant had explained to the foreman that the thing approaching him rapidly from his left was a knuckle sandwich. After the explanations had been concluded, work was discontinued on the teleport, which subsequently passed unnoticed on the invoice as summed explosions at 5 times the price. "Hell's donkeys," muttered Zaphod as he and Ford attempted to sort through the tangle of wiring. After a moment or so, Ford told him to stand back. He tossed a coin into the teleport and jiggled a switch on the lolling control panel. With a crackle and a spit of light, the coin vanished. "That much of it works," said Ford. "However, there is no guidance system. A matter of transference teleport with no guidance programming could put you, well, anywhere." The sun of Kakrafoon loomed huge on the screen. "Who cares?" said Zaphod. "We go where we go." "And," said Ford, "there is no auto system. We couldn't all go. Someone would have to stay here and operate it." A solemn moment shuffled past. The sun loomed larger and larger. "Hey, Marvin, kid," said Zaphod brightly. "How you doing?" "Very badly, I suspect," muttered Marvin. "Well, I'm doing well, Duo. Thank you for asking." I wish my nose would stop itching. It feels like something's touching it. A shortish while later, the concert on Kakrafoon reached an unexpected climax. The black ship, with its single morose occupant, had plunged on schedule into the nuclear furnace of the sun. Massive solar flares licked out from it, millions of miles into space, thrilling and in a few cases spilling the dozen or so flare riders who had been coasting close to the surface of the sun in anticipation of the moment. Moments before the flare light reached Kakrafoon, the pounding desert cracked along a deep fault line. A huge and hitherto undetected underground river lying far beneath the surface gushed to the surface to be followed seconds later by the eruption of millions of tons of boiling lava that flowed hundreds of feet into the air, instantaneously vaporizing the river both above and below the surface in an explosion that echoed to the far side of the world and back again. Those very few who witnessed the event and survived swear that the whole 100,000 square miles of the desert rose into the air like a mile-thick pancake, flipped itself over, and fell back down. At that precise moment, the solar radiation from the flares filtered through the clouds of vaporized water and struck the ground. A year later, the 100,000 square mile desert was thick with flowers. The structure of the atmosphere around the planet was subtly altered. The sun blazed less harshly in the summer, the cold bit less bitterly in the winter, pleasant rain fell more often, and slowly the desert world of Kakrafoon became a paradise. Even the telepathic power with which the people of Kakrafoon had been cursed with was permanently dispersed by the force of the explosion. A spokesman for Disaster Area, the one who had all the environmentalists shot, was later quoted as saying that it had been a good gig. Many people spoke movingly of the healing powers of music. A few skeptical scientists examined the records of the events more closely and claimed that they had discovered faint vestiges of a vast artificially induced improbability field drifting in from a nearby region of space. The improbability field is probably from the Heart of Gold, which is nearby. Somehow. But that concludes chapter 21. My voice is starting to crack and my throat is beginning to hurt, so I will call it a day with this. Yes, my finger is touching my nose. Easy for me to say? What? Blah blah hum? Is easy for me to say? But thank you guys for watching. I am starting to try to be a little more active on places like Instagram and Twitter, so you can follow me, Eva Dell on Instagram and Eva Dell Gaming on Twitter. Easy for me to say, Eve. I'm totally missing whatever it is you're trying to tell me. I'm sorry. I am not with it. I'm not understanding, and my foot's asleep. Well, yeah, thanks for hanging out and for chatting a little bit. It was awesome to have you here. Welcome to the stream. I will read some more tomorrow at 11. What will I read? It'll probably be like chapters 21 through maybe like 25 or 26. There's still quite a bit of this particular book left. I think it's got some like 30 odd chapters. Yeah, 34. Looks like very similar to the last one. And then after reading tomorrow will be Jackbox Games. So if you've never done that, it's pretty fun. We all play together. It's pretty simple. You don't have to download anything or buy anything. You just log on to a website and put in a room code. So it's pretty cool. Usually have a few people from the Discord, and I haven't done a gaming stream in a while, so it'll be fun. Last week, I didn't do one last week. The week before, I don't think anyone really showed up to play. So, yeah, if anyone is interested in doing that, and also if you would like, you can join the Discord if you're not already in there. I'll go ahead and drop a link for that now. That way you can get updates, when I'm going live, when I'm doing stuff. And I'll try to be a little bit better about updating places like Instagram and Twitter as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you for listening. I'm glad that you liked my voices, OSX. And you guys have a great afternoon, and I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and by the way, thank you for following. The alert just now played for me, so that's nice. Okay, but for real, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Be good.